My name is Ed Nichols. I'm the fourth generation behind Edward Erastus Nichols. And what I wanted to do today is just talk about the early days. But the years that my family, our family, was involved in the Cliff House were from 1874 to about 1946 or 48. So about 75 years, 70 plus years that the family owned the property, and one generation or another was here. It began with my great-grandfather, Edward Erastus Nichols. Quick story there, I am not Edward Erastus IV. I was born on the same night that my grandfather, Edward Jr., died in the same hospital. My father said he was moving back and forth between floors. But my mother said, that's fine, he can be Edward, but we are not having an Erastus. He said, if you want the initials, you can call him Edward enough, because we're not doing this again either, so. But he was born in 1829, and he grew up on the East Coast, in Norwich, Connecticut. There was a family grant area that the family owned, and a number of different relatives grew up in that area in Norwich. But he was in business in New York City. He was working in the hotel business. He was at the French Hotel, and then later got into the restaurant business. But before all that, during the Civil War, he was recruited for the Army. But he didn't make it because he was told that his teeth were such that he could not bite down on a bullet for the musket, and therefore he was not inducted into the Army. He then went to the Navy, and he was given a position as a steward on the USS Albany, but was sick the day that it sailed and was unable to board, which is a good thing, because on that trip the Albany sank in 1854 and there were no survivors. It was off of the Azores. So he was in New York, and as I say, he was in the hotel business, and started a restaurant, the Nichols and Thompson and Nichols Eatery. It's the only time I've seen a formal name of an eatery, but that's what they called it. And he got married. He married Anna Maria Macaulay. The Macaulay family was well established in the East Coast, and her father was in the marble mining business. They had a marble quarry in Vermont, and they would come into New York frequently. That's where Edward met Anna Maria, and they were married there in 1859. The Macaulay family was very generous with them, and here you see a picture of the North Adams portion of the mine. It's now a national park, or a state park. It's interesting because the Macaulays were very generous, and as a wedding gift they gave a brownstone to the couple at 34th and 3rd Avenue in New York City, and which was a nice wedding present, not a bad one to have. They stayed there from 1859 on until early 1870s. But at that time, the children were born. They had 4 children. The first 3 were born there. William was born in 1860, and then Ida, whom you will hear more about, who was really a key to the activities here, and Edward Jr., my grandfather. And they were all born there as the business carried on with the Thompson and Nichols Eatery and Restaurant. And unfortunately, in 1872, Edward was diagnosed with tuberculosis and told if he wanted to live throughout the end of the year, he had to get to a dry climate. And that's when he boarded a train, left his wife and 3 children in New York, and came out west to Denver. And as he arrived here, he wrote back to his son William about how there were so many Indians here with all of their painted faces and what he called toggery on their clothing. And there are a number of Chinamen who were the laundries. He said that was a good thing because they did my laundry for him. But as you see here, when you traveled to Denver in well, this is a picture actually of 1870 prior to his arrival in 72. But that streak of white you see across the front, those are all tents for tuberculars. And it was a destination for people around the country with tuberculosis. We'll talk in a minute about some of the famous people, but Jerome Wheeler, for example, left Macy's, the Macy's in New York of his family's establishment, and they came out here for the same reason, and that's how they ended up here. Mrs. Wheeler had tuberculosis, and that's how they got out here. So he arrived in Denver. He set up a livery stable, and the Macaulay, still being generous people, it was the Macaulay and Nichols livery. I don't believe Mr. Macaulay ever saw it, but it was set on Wynkoop Street in Denver. I wish they'd held on to that property because it's now the site of a Union Station, but that's all right. They sold it. Actually, they did sell it, but it wasn't working. So he looked around at where he might go, and there was the Colorado Springs Company for $100 was offering the opportunity for individuals to buy lots and land, quote unquote. And in doing that, they were allowed to pick their place of residence, what lot they wanted, what land they wanted, and pay $100 for it. And Nichols' family, by this time his wife and 3 children had joined him. They came out in 1873 and joined him, and they chose a spot here in Manitou because of the wonderful springs, the view, the opportunity to be this close to the mountains, and it was such fresh air and so good for people with tuberculosis. He was diagnosed in 72, came out here to live through the end of the year. He died in 1904, 34 years later, so 32 years later. But they chose this site, and they leased the Cliff House. The Cliff House was built in 1874 and went through 2 changes of hands. It was built by 2 Canadians, Sutcliffe and Webster, 2 individuals from Canada, and then leased by a pair of brothers who were not doing well financially and left mysteriously one day after a fire was put out, and they were never seen again. But he went back and he leased the property in 1876, and that's when the Nichols era in the Cliff House started. And it was interesting because moving forward, it was only open probably 4 months during the summer, from May through September, when the weather was warm and there was no winter occupancy. But he introduced in 1876 winter rates. He had it open year-round, and by 1879 he had added rooms. As you see up there in the above the hotel, that ring of white is a ring of tents, and that's for people that was overflow from the hotel. If they couldn't accommodate enough, you could get a tent, and you could be there. It was probably, for the people who came, the stage from Colorado Springs to Leadville stopped here every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and on the return trip on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. So there was a constant flow of short-term occupants that stayed here, and I'm sure they might have been the ones who used the tents the most frequently. But they did have that, and some cottages they added between the tents and the hotel. So by 1879, it had been established. It was doing well. Here's an article, 1883. I won't read it all, but one of the things they brag about is the beds had spring mattresses. So no more of these lumpy mattresses that they endured in the past. They were now using spring mattresses, which was, and they also mentioned that there was a livery now associated with the hotel so that you could ride. Well, that was important because daughter Ida and mother were very, very anxious to entertain as they continued to build and expand the hotel. They wanted to make sure their guests were comfortable. They, in '87, added the east wing that not the one you see here, but the one you see in the picture, which was an adaptation of what had started out to be a stable at one point. They then turned that into rooms and added a second floor to it. So the hotel continued to grow and became a tourist destination. And that was due to so many of the wonderful people that were here. The Colorado Springs company that had lured the Nichols with their $100 offer was sponsored primarily by two individuals, and that was William Palmer and Dr. Bell. The Bell and Palmer partnership had gone on for some time while they developed the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad and put in the narrow gauge rail line from Denver to Colorado Springs, and had previously, Palmer, for example, had previously been involved with the Kansas Railroad. And so they brought a lot of people here that knew them from the rail experience, and then people like the Wheelers, Jerome Wheeler, who was here across the street where the post office is now, is on their front lawn. It was a large lawn. Wheeler Park is also there, part of the lawn then, and the Wheeler Park today. But these people were drawing their friends from New York and Philadelphia and around the country, Chicago. And the hotel really did grow in its popularity and became quite a destination by the late 1880s. In 1900, they took down the old East Wing and added, pardon me, the East Wing that you see today, and that's been there since 1900. That's where Jim pointed out that turret that you see on the end is where the fire started that consumed that whole portion of the hotel.
What started the fire?
An individual who was sleeping, he was smoking and sleeping, and he might have had some liquid prior to that. But according to Jim, that was the source of the fire. And by the time, I mean, this structure, built in 1874 of all wood, was virtually a matchbox, and the fire consumed the major portion of the east wing and across the top of the fourth floor. But the Bells and Nichols and others in the community weren't just in the hotel business. They were very closely associated with the Episcopal Church. And I remember my father talking about the fact that great-grandfather Edward was working with the bishop in Denver, and they helped form a school up there. They also built a church that you see in the lower left corner of this slide. Here, small chapel that they held, well, originally they held Sunday services here in this room, and then built the chapel down, but it was down on the creek, on Fountain Creek, about 3 buildings down from here. And during a flood, it was completely washed away. And that's when the Bells and Nichols together built the new St. Andrew's Church that you see down on the end of the block there. And it's interesting because the altar, the steps, and the windows are all dedicated to different individuals in the Nichols family. Anna Maria and Grace and Ida were all honored in the windows and on the altar. Anna Maria was really the hostess who planned everything, Edward's wife. It was a great deal different out here than it was in New York, and having grown up with the Macaulay family, who gave them brownstones and other things for wedding presents. But this was her place, and she wanted to make sure everyone was happy. So she included activities on an ongoing basis. She planned the meals. I still have a cookbook with her handwriting in the margins about how she wanted meals prepared. But they took a warm personal interest in everyone who was a guest. You know, you might be on a burro ride in the afternoon or find a impromptu party like a bungalow party here you see on the right. Somebody's got a tennis racket, somebody's got a banjo. I don't know how the tennis racket sounded, but they used everything. They were close friends, as I mentioned, with Palmers. And here it tells you how close. Here's a card from General Palmer saying, by the way, can the bearer of this card have 2 or 3 loaves of bread? We ran out of bread at Glen Area, and we have guests, and the bakery is closed. So they dropped, he added at the end, the bearer will pay for the bread. Here's a note from P.T. Barnum saying, I feel under deep obligation to you for your courtesy, kindness, and shall take great pleasure in recommending you and your house to all our friends, as will my wife and daughter, Mrs. Bucktel. I am warmly and truly yours, P.T. Barnum, 1890. Others that were here were entertained by the entire family. Everyone got involved. William was then a partner in the Nichols Hotel Company, and Ida was everyone's best friend and hostess for whatever was going on. Ida, every picture you see, she has a smile on her face. She was involved in so many different ways. And then the next one is Edward Jr. He and his wife later took over the hotel when things slowed down. And their youngest sister, Anne, who was born here, 15 years younger than her older brother, William, married an individual who was visiting from Nashville, and she moved to Nashville only to return upon occasions during summers when she was able to. But Ida made sure everybody was busy. She planned things like the Germans' dances. These were dances where you had to dress up in a certain style or wear a costume. You had to compete in different events during the party, and you were awarded prizes if you did well. And you can see some of the individuals and the way they dressed them for the party in the lower right-hand picture. I'm not sure I would look that good in stripes, but I suppose those stripes are better than others that might be worn during that period of time, so they continued. Planning was always fun. So you do something wild in the afternoon, and in the evening you'd have a fancy dress party. And when they talked about fancy dress, they were very serious. As you can see, the train on that dress that lady is wearing, and the fact that all those gentlemen were in tuxedos. But the kids didn't get away free either. They entertained and were actors in an event. Well, here happens to be the Mikado that they had the local children as well as hotel guests, and each had a role in participating, and they were in this case dressed up and performing the Mikado. Spontaneous parties, I think, took place everywhere. Here's a picture of an attic party. I don't think that was one of the real sought-after venues, but maybe late in the evening there was a party up there. Or you'd have a gathering. You see in the lower left the ladies out on the front lawn, and they were having a conversation or a presentation or tea. I'm not sure which, or maybe all of the above. But in the evening, you were back to a fancy dress and some type of an evening event, major meal, and a fancy dress party. During the day, you could be outside. You might be playing tennis or fishing, or you could go hunting with Ida. Again, Ida was everywhere. That's Ida cleaning her gun on the left side, and she's there with her dog Nip on the right and holding some of her catch of the day. She shot, it looks like a falcon or a hawk of some type. But Nip, the dog, was always with her. Nip was a faithful dog. She would go to Cripple Creek often to visit family friends, the Adams, up in Cripple Creek. And to do that, you got on the train here in Manitou, you went up to Divide, you changed trains, you went over from Divide to Cripple Creek. And she did that a lot in the summers. And Nip was always along. But in the winter, the family went out to the West Coast and managed a hotel in San Diego one year, and the staff noticed that Nip was missing. They didn't know what to do. They went all over town. They couldn't find Nip. They were afraid because they knew Ida loved Nip. They checked at the train station. They said, "Have you seen Nip?" "No." but we'll check and see, because he rode the train so often. So they telegraphed up to Divide. Divide hadn't seen Nip. They checked Cripple Creek. Cripple Creek Station said no Nip. They checked at Leadville. Yeah, he's sleeping in the cab of the locomotive, and he'll be back down tomorrow on tomorrow's train. So he had taken it upon himself to go for a ride, and off he went. As I said, during the day, the guests were involved in so many different. Here you see two of the ladies tending a campfire at a picnic, and that pot of coffee looks pretty heavy the way she's holding that boom for it. And then back in the evening, they were to a formal attire and a formal event. Pikes Peak was a frequent stop, regardless of the weather. Here you see guests up on Pikes Peak in that lower right-hand corner, leaning against a snow-covered drift, and the people in the upper left. I don't think that's a proposal going on there, but we'll find out someday, I guess. But that's where they were, in the snow on top of Pikes Peak. You could go on a picnic. They had large picnics. They went all over. They went up to Cascade. They were in Manitou Lake, Manitou Park, and horse-drawn wagons in very large groups. But here's another couple that were headed for a picnic, but their wagon had a runaway horse. Well, it tipped the wagon over, but don't let that spoil your picnic. As you can see, the lady's headdress, you can tell who she is, and here she is again over on the right side, and she was at the picnic. So don't let, just a little thing like a runaway horse spoil your picnic. There were a lot of important guests. Jim mentioned many of them, but I think as you see it, and the rooms are named here, as Jim said, after important guests. Here is a photograph of when Vice President Adlai Stevenson was here. He was Vice President under Grover Cleveland, and he came out here in 1904. That's a picture of his wife and daughter as they were out front. Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy was here. Teddy came back last night, but he was here in 1913 also with the Wetherell family. The Wetherells were the ones that were so clearly associated with the discovery of Mesa Verde. But they also knew a great deal about the West, and they were back in 1913 for a trip to go through and plat the Colorado Plateau and make sure it was understood of what resources were there. And Teddy Roosevelt was invited to go along and stayed here at the Cliff House on that event. The Ute Indians they summered in this area. This was part of their territory, and the tribe would summer up above Ute Pass, but they would have ceremonial rides that they would come down into town, and occasionally, and here's a picture my father said is Chief Manitou, but it looks like they were having a pretty good time on the front porch of the Cliff House. A number of painters, famous painters that were here. Charles Partridge Adams was here and stayed. This is a picture of Mount Sneffels that actually hung right there in what was referred to as the music room. And Adams was here frequently, and a good friend of the Nichols family, as was Charles Craig. Craig was a local artist, but he wanted to sell this painting of these three Indians that he loved. My grandfather said, Edward Jr. said, "It's a great painting, I'll buy it if you do something with the foreground. It's too dull, it's a little boring in the foreground." So he had him paint the rock and bush that you see in the lower right-hand corner, and then he did buy the painting. Harvey Young, another well-known national and international artist. He would paint a lot in France as well as here in Europe and as well as here, but he loved the West, and he came out to Colorado and stayed here, and he actually traveled on I think it was due to Palmer and Bell, but he traveled on a private rail car to different places when he went to do his painting. And we've all heard the story of how Henry Ford and Firestone and Edison traveled together as a group, their families, And they went all over the country camping. And their way of camping, and Meg, it was different than what you and I did. They had an entourage that would set up a tent for dinner and set up another tent for a cook, for the chef and staff to cook their meals, and set up another tent for each couple with beds that were brought in on wagons. So it was tenting, you know, it was camping, okay. Glamping, yes. That was before it was, yeah. But they did stay here as well. And my father frequently told a story about the fact that they were with one of the Cliff House staff, and they were driving, touring the area, and had a flat. Took it to the garage and said, "I'm sorry, I don't have time to do it right now." He said, "You don't understand. That's Harvey Firestone in the front seat, and Henry Ford in the back seat." He said, "Yeah, I guess you're going to tell me that's Edison next to him." He said, "As a matter of fact, yes." Oh, okay. I'll be right back with that tire. I'll get that done right away. Interestingly, Thomas Edison married William Nichols' sister-in-law, his wife's sister. He married Mary, and Mina was her sister, and that's Edison's second wife. I don't know whether they met here or somewhere else, but she was with him frequently when they would visit here, Mina Miller, and she became a part of the family. William Henry Jackson, we've all heard and seen photographs of Jackson, especially around here, but he loved the Cliff House and stayed here frequently and wrote very strong things in this book, his autobiography called Time Exposure, about how he loved to stay at the Cliff House and how the Nichols made him feel more like a guest, not of the house, but of the family. And that's written in the book Time Exposure, that his own autobiography. But he was on so many different types of trips. He worked with the Department of Interior and was all over the West in different locations. Here's an 1874 photograph from the Hayden expedition. He loved the stereopticon two view. He had a stereo camera which showed two views, so that when you looked at them together in a handheld camera, they became a three-dimensional image. And fortunately for us, he contributed a number of those, gifted a number of those photographs to the family. I guess when you're a photographer, you've got a lot of equipment you have to take with you. Here's a picture of them loading up on the expedition for their photographic equipment back in '74. So I guess the cameras that we all carry in the back of our phones are a little bit of an improvement from where they were at that time. Nichols was involved in the hotel and restaurant business, so the menu at the Cliff House became a key item. It was very important. Here you see the kitchen staff, the chef and others on the upper right, and the service staff. They were very loyal. They came back year after year from the South, and but you see what was required as a daily inspection. Edward Jr. would inspect and make sure their uniforms were correct, that they understood who was going to be there that day, what was going to be happening. But the main thing was the menu. In the summer, they had all sorts of incredible dishes that you wouldn't expect. But they had in the winter, and William would write stories about this, he had to take a wagon up to Lake George. They cut ice up there, loaded it in the back of wagons on different days, bringing more and more ice down from Lake George, packed it in a cave above behind the Cliff House, covered it with hay, and that's where their refrigerator was for summer food. Here you see I don't see if it says the day, but it was in, June 7th was in 1896. Things such as Columbia River salmon in Colorado in summer of 1896. And it was things like that that were very important for an evening menu, to have your choice of salmon or lamb or all the different calves head, anything you wanted. The kitchen was prepared. and did a wonderful job. As the years went on, Edward Sr. and Anna Maria aged and took more and more time away from the Cliff House and traveled. And son Edward, who had married Grace Sweezy, her family was from New York and were out here as guests. They met here and fell in love and were married here in Colorado. Grace then took over with Edward, running the hotel, and she and Ida were close friends. So between the two of them, they made sure everyone was well entertained. But Edward and Grace really, with Ida, ran the hotel. At that time, William had moved on to the East Coast. He graduated from Yale and then in engineering and ended up with Alice Chalmers. He taught at Yale for a number of years prior and then ended up with Alice Chalmers Corporation and stayed in the East Coast. So Edward and Grace and Ida were left to run the property. Here you see a picture of Grace with my father at, I think, about age 6 on the one on the left. And on the right, he was honored to be invited to ride with the Utes on one of their ceremonial rides. But here he is, as you see this individual here, who, unlike the rest of the people in the procession, is wearing a tie, probably for the day, and that is my father, who was part of the ceremonial ride of the Utes coming down Ute Pass and into the community. He stayed here. He lived in the turret room. Funny story about that. One summer, at the end of the summer, they were closing up, and his father told him to help with the closing and go up and go down to the bar. Anything, unopened bottles, put them in a case and take them down to the cellar and store them. Any open, just get rid of it, pour it out, because nobody was going to be there for the winter. And my father went through and he said that he had never had any of this, so he tried a little of that and poured the rest. And he never had any of this, so he tried a little of that. And when he finished, he said he never suspected his father would be so angry because he woke up in jail. At least that's where he thought he was. It turns out he had passed out and rolled under the bed in the turret room and was looking at the metal slats on the bottom of the bed. He thought he was in jail. It was later clarified it might have been a misinterpretation. But here he is during one of the famous floods of the Cliff House. The river, when it overruns, comes right down Canyon Avenue. And here's a picture. The back of this picture, his mother wrote, Proctor was up 36 hours trying to keep water out of the basement. And he looks a little disgusted in this one, but I don't think that look stopped the water. But he did grow up here. And here's a picture of the Cliff House Special. Dad was very close to Billy Trammell. Billy Trammell was the property manager. He managed the stables. He managed all the cars and the property. And together they built this car for the Pikes Peak Hill climb. They built it on the frame of a Studebaker, which was a very popular vehicle at that time. And Dad said the car had a turbocharger. And the turbocharger was Billy sitting in the other side, the other seat, pumping air through a tire pump into the engine so that at high altitude it had an advantage. Billy was a friend, and Dad would often ask Billy for favors. And he said one day he met a very nice young lady here at the hotel, and could he borrow one of the cars that evening and take this young lady out? And Billy said, sure, go ahead. Well, Dad took this young lady up to the garage, opened the door, and got her into the car. She went right into the grease pit. Billy told him later, said, Proctor, that was the wrong car. That one was having the oil changed. I don't think that he ever saw that girl again. He was also very interested in aviation. He graduated from Princeton with a degree in engineering. And his father backed him, and they purchased the Alexander Aircraft Company, which made the Alexander Eagle Rock biplane. during the Depression, Dad was working as an engineer at Alexander Aircraft, and during the Depression, the company went down. Plane sales obviously ceased, and so he bought the remains of the company and renamed it Aircraft Mechanics, where they worked on the aircraft that had previously been manufactured and sold, and then did other things for the Army and the Army Aviation at that time, the Army Air Corps. And they went out he and his partner went out to California, to Douglas Aircraft, and were bidding on a contract right after they bought the company, and were very successful. They won a contract from Douglas Aircraft, but they had to then contact their good close friend Chase Stone, who was the president of the First National Bank here, and said, can you give us enough money deposited in our account so we can get a ticket home and start on this contract that they won. So Chase Stone was a very close business partner, and the company grew. During the Korean War and during World War II, it was the largest employer here in Colorado Springs. And it was across the street from Nichols Airfield on North Nevada Avenue. And they continued there. Dad kept the company until the 1960s when he sold it off. So that's kind of the early years of the Nichols family association with the hotel. Here you see a family reunion, probably the last get-together of all of them. The four family members seated in the front row, Anne on the left, who lived in Nashville. William, the senior member of the family, with his daughter Marion behind him, and her husband, and his wife Mary Miller Nichols with her hand on his shoulder. Next is Ida, and again she has a smile. Ida, I think, just wore a smile to bed. And her husband Harry Holt. Harry was the head of the Pikes Peak Cog Railway. That may have had something to do with the frequent trips up Pikes Peak. I'm not sure, I wasn't here at the time, but I know they went up daily. And next to him is my grandfather Edward, and behind him my father and his second wife Lily Wandell Nichols. Grace had passed away in 1934, and Edward later remarried to Lily. But that's the family and the family involvement in the Cliff House for those early years. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk to it, to be here and to see this hotel and this property that began 150 years ago and where it is today. So thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
My name is Jim Morley. I was the one that rebuilt the Cliff House in 1999. Bought it in 81 in October. Then in March we had a big giant fire. And the fire consumed the entire building. I was in Hawaii. I had heard there was a small fire, and I just said, put it out, put the fire out. They called back and they said, Jim, this is not a small fire. So I said, I think I better come, because I had bought it 4 months earlier. So there was 9 million gallons of water that went through the building, and there was about 9 fire battalions that came from as far away as Denver and other places, many as they could get locally. It was the kind of thing that the town started crying, because it was the most historic building in town. The Barker House is okay, but this is magnificent. During the war, this was a barracks for the Army. And so it was not a hotel. Then it turned into an apartment house. And when I bought it, it was a 42-room apartment house. I had always had in my mind that I really loved old buildings. And I'm from the Bay Area. Live in San Jose or that area, and I thought, this is a long way, but I like Colorado. I mean, and I bought a building downtown with a group, and I bought this with a group. And the group came out of Denver, and they said they wanted to be part of a limited partnership group, and I took the responsibility of being a GP. Then after the fire, I was on the plane all the way back here and interviewed out front by the people who were with the newspaper out of Denver. And they said, how much do you think this is going to cost? Of course, to redo. And I went, geez, I'd never done this before. I'd never put money into a building that I had to rebuild. And I had no clue how much you had to rebuild, how much of this was bad. So I said, well, at least 100,000. And I went, so $10 million later, it did happen. At that point in March of '82, the economy was horrible. We built the fourth floor back on it and took out all the furniture, took out the pictures. I recognize that picture there, so it was here way back when. So I guess we just scarfed everything. And of course, the fillery along here was taken out quickly so that we could put it back. With water, which was the big damage, it was not the fire that damaged most of the building, it was the water. And when you had that much water going through a building, the fire was actually over there in the corner, but they sprayed the whole building, so that half the building came down. The floor was, you had to be careful where you walked. And it was, the whole thing was sad, and I'm not sure I'm up to this, So I boarded the building up for 17 years, and they didn't like to hear that. City Father said, what are you going to do? And then they called me and they said, why don't you rebuild it? And I said, I can do it when I get a chance. So in the meantime, my wonderful folks that invested with me in Denver said, what's going on, Mr. General Partner? And I said, well, it doesn't look good now because now everybody's got to contribute. And I said, I'd be happy to have you guys contribute if you want. I know it's going to be a lot of money. And if you don't want, you probably want to get out of the partnership. Just write the thing off. And so they did. They said, we're just investors who want to invest this much, not that much. It took time to redo the building, as you can imagine. Maybe I had a decorator who came from Incline Village, and I was here about every week and stayed in just about every place around here. And then we started in with Chuck Murphy, who was still in town. He helped me to rebuild and everything. There were a few things we changed. And when we were designing the rooms, the one thing that I noticed in Japan earlier that I had traveled there was that they all had heated toilet seats in the rooms.
We love that.
And it's not an easy thing to put a heated toilet seat. You got to have a plug.
Yes.
And so you got to find the plug outside the bathroom because they don't put plugs. So I did that in every room.
Thank you.
Has heated toilet seats. It's really a funny deal. People are like, what? What'd you do? But boy, try it. You'll like it. You'll like it. So I did do that. And we wanted to make the suites, which were named after the wonderful people who stayed here. The 17 suites are named after the 17 notables that stayed here and there during the time. And I'm staying in the Henry Ford suite up there, and I most often stayed in the Thomas Edison suite. They're all different, but they're all wonderful. We tried to put tubs in there and put stall showers in all of those. We had one problem with the Buffalo Bill Suite, which is in the turret right up here. We had a very small bathroom. And so AAA said, they came, and of course we wanted to have 5 diamonds. And I said, you gotta have 5 diamonds. Come on, we're gonna have 5 diamonds. No, you're not. I said, why? He says, that bathroom's too small. I said, 1 bathroom, you're going to knock me down? Yeah, I am. So that's why we're not 5 diamonds. We wanted the best of the best, so we wanted the best chef. I hired a chef who was a chefs. I mean, he finally he would love to put truffle oil and everything, and finally I said, well, let's look at your food costs. Well, the food costs were about 54% of the food, and I said, now I had to look it up because I'd never run a restaurant, but I did, and I said, I can't believe it's that high. Is there? Well, that's what he was cutting up truffles and putting them on. And I went, I don't think we're supposed to do that. We're going to do it in the future. I don't think we're going to do it in the future. So let's bring him down to 35. Well, he wasn't really fond of that. He didn't want to do that. So he did leave, and he went back to teach back east, which is fine. That meant the next chef came on. And now we have a beautiful chef. Marcelo is wonderful. He really does a wonderful job. I did tell a story yesterday about this room, and this room is always the music room and the kind of let's go in for cocktail room. And so the ladies and the gentlemen, who are all, you'll see in the pictures, dressed up to the nines, which you can see that I don't do that anymore. Well, in 1907 I did. But now I don't do that. And so the ladies would have to excuse the gentlemen, because the gentlemen, some of you guys back there look like you might want to be excused. And what you would do is you would go down to the bar and have a drink. And because there was a bar called the Cave. And the Cave is on the lowest level underneath the sidewalks. And it came out many years later, on the street above, which is I think 5th Street, I think. Anyway, 4 houses in was a nunnery. And not that many years ago. And they decided to leave. So the people who took the house took down all the blackboards and the notes that are on the wall. And in the basement, they took this huge blackboard off the wall. And here's a clear as mud is to the Cliff House. And it was another cave that went in. Well, okay, I got a cave here, and I got a cave over there. And so these guys, resourceful as they are, were saying, how do we get from there to here? We know how to do that. We're miners. I don't know how to do that. So they did. They had to go up about 150 feet, and then they burrowed through, and while the ladies were down here sipping their tea, they were having a wonderful time up there. But then they came down, and it's time probably to retire for the evening. Some people thought that the Wheeler House was the brothel, and it was not. Never was. Though I did buy the Wheeler Motel. I think I paid $100,000 for it. It was really, but it was about ready to fall down. Never did figure out what to do with it, and I think they still own it here. Sean, do they still own the Wheeler House? Yeah. They still own that, yeah. So he was here with me. A lot of the staff live there. They do live there now. Well, we did finish the project. Got a couple of loans, and as I say, I bought it for $960,000 when I bought it, and I sold it for $14 million. And I did make a little bit of money on the top side. So, well, not that much. So it was a great labor of love, and this is my first time I've been back. So, and I still live in Newport right now, and so I'm pleased to be here. And our niece is here, and we're going to take her down to the Broadmoor and show her a really nice hotel. But you can't find a better hotel with better service and eclectic as it is right here.
Thank you.